Yeah, this video is going to be the Cadillac from heck. I say heck because I'm really not allowed to cuss on YouTube, so there you go. So this is the Cadillac from heck. Now, I've had this Cadillac for a few months. Let me tell you something, guys. I am regretting taking this stinking thing in. So it originally came to me with the complaint that it's got a bunch of oil leaks. This Cadillac has always had oil leaks, rear main seal, front main seal, cam phasers leaking, all that other good stuff. Long story short, we go through and we start fixing oil leaks. Now, as we start fixing oil leaks, more oil leaks showed up. For example, the cam phasers, okay? Now, if you have a car that is dripping oil and is leaking oil, then obviously, because it's a closed system, oil pressure is not correct or where it needs to be at any one time. So, with a system like that, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. So you fix one seal, and the next seal that's just as weak is going to blow. Fix that seal, and then another seal will blow. So that's been kind of the story on this. So we get oil leaks fixed, we get the cam phasers fixed, we get all that fixed up, and we start taking it for its post-op checks, and we notice that upon low acceleration, so basically if you're at idle and you start to accelerate, the engine has the slightest misfire. It is so slight that the computer does not register it quite yet, but you can definitely feel it. You can definitely feel it misfire, and you can also tell via the RPMs. So one of the issues is right off the bat, we weren't sure if it was a misfire or if it was a slip in the transmission. So we take it for multiple test drives, go to parking lots, put it in neutral as it's rolling, test the engine. Longer story short, we were finally able to isolate it down to a misfire and an issue with the engine. Now, we put new coils and all that other good stuff on here, so we started pulling spark plugs and coils. And I'm going to show you what we found. Let's walk into the shop here. And the cool thing about spark plugs are, if you pay attention to spark plugs are an indicator into what's really going on in the cylinder. A spark plug can tell you all kinds of neat things. So here we have the 4 coils and the spark plugs. And let me see if I can get better focus for you guys here. There we go. Okay. So, and I also have a diagram of the cylinders. Now this is driver's side, this is passenger side. So it's as if we are facing the car like so, okay? All right, so we've got this far back spark plug. Now this is the first spark plug that I pulled. Now if you look at all of these spark plugs here, you'll notice that the consistency of the spark plugs are pretty much the same, right? They all look like they've burnt good and all that other good stuff. For the most part, they're pretty clean, and you can tell that they've been firing until you get to this back plug that has oil-soaked threads, and you can see the discoloration on the electrode there. It's got a little bit of a yellowish to it compared to the white in all the other electrodes. So we pull that spark plug again, you can see it's puddled oil there. The only place that you really see oil is from the threads down. There's no oil, or is there any indication of oil or oil stains anywhere else. If you also take a peek at the coils, there's no indication that the coils have been soaked in oil or that oil has been leaking down into the spark plug tubes via the valve cover grommets in order to get oil down into these threads. So how in the world would oil get on these threads, and why is this spark plug black like that and been burning? Well, that's when a compression test comes in, and what we need to do is we need to determine, is this a misfire due to a timing issue, a valve issue, or are we starting to look at a worn out engine with bad piston rings? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do a compression test here. And I'm going to record all the numbers. Now what I've got here is dry and wet. And so we're going to run through and we're going to do a compression test dry. And we're going to see what compression is with a dry cylinder. Then we're going to pour a little bit of oil into the cylinders. And if compression does come up, then that is definitely an indicator that we've got a worn out engine and this engine needs a rebuild. Or it's ultimately time just to drive this car until the wheels fall off of it and get rid of it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take some time and I'm going to do the compression test. And I'm going to record all these numbers and I'm going to come back and show you what we have found. All right, and we're back after running our dry compression test. And as you can see, we have some concerning numbers. First of all, these numbers, 95 PSI, 90, 70, 80, 95, 90, 60, and 90. That's a dead cylinder. That's not proper compression at all. So we need to figure out why everyone... Now, the fact that some of these are consistent between 90 and 95, 1, 2, 3, 4, you've got 5 cylinders that are consistent. These cylinders here, the ones that have 80, 70, and 60, this is a major variable. This is more than 10% variable between the cylinders. So we ultimately need to determine what we're dealing with. Now, I already suspect we're dealing with a combination of worn out piston rings and valve timing that needs to be looked into. However, ultimately, it's really not worth it for this car. So what we're going to do next is we're going to do a wet compression test where we're going to put a little bit of oil down into the cylinder. And if there's a major difference in any of these numbers after we introduce a little oil into the cylinder, then that is a direct indication that we've got worn out piston rings. What happens when you put oil into a cylinder with a worn out piston ring is that oil coats the top of the piston and gets in between the piston and the cylinder wall there, and it closes all of the microscopic gaps that worn out piston ring is exposing. So therefore it closes it all up and brings your compression up. So that's what we're going to do next. We're just going to introduce a little oil into each cylinder and then we're going to run a compression test. Alrighty folks, so we have finished the compression test on the Cadillac. We checked the driver's side. Now, if you remember right, we had one spark plug that was really more oil soaked onto threads than all the other ones. And so we immediately went to that cylinder to do what's known as the dry and the wet compression test. Now, as you can see on a normal test, all the way across the board, these cylinders are not within specs. This is nowhere near the amount of compression we should have. I do believe, as you can see here, that we are dealing with a few different issues with these numbers. Two of them being, one, after the wet compression test, after adding a little bit of oil to the cylinder, as you can see, compression came way up quite a bit. Now, without doing all the math, common sense will just basically tell you that is way more than a 10% variable between 90 and 120. Now, if you look here, we have actually pretty much the same. This is actually okay. This is about a 10% or less than a 10% variable between 90 PSI and 100 after adding oil. In this cylinder, we have way low compression. And here, we've got another major variable after adding oil. We came up to 100 PSI. And then in the front, we've got 80 and 115 as well. Bottom line is, when you have such a high variable in between cylinders after doing a dry and a wet test, this is an absolute indicator that we've got worn out piston rings. And we've got oil that's coming up between the piston rings, getting up into the cylinder, fouling plugs, and causing issues and whatnot. Now then, this would be the reason why we've got an engine that has the most slightest misfire that the computer is not reading. And at this point, with the history that's behind this Cadillac, it's probably best just to leave it alone. Drive it until the wheels fall off. If you're wondering how exactly can this happen, one of the things I want to point out is this is a 2005 Cadillac with extremely low miles on it, and it's barely been driven. Oh, hey, the pizza's here. Hold on a second, folks. Okay, I'm going to go in and eat lunch here in just a minute, but bottom line is, cars are meant to be driven. How is it possible that a vehicle with such low miles has so many oil leaks, needed seals replaced, has got piston rings that, you know, ultimately have lost their spring. It's simple. They need to be driven. They're not made to sit. And the worst thing you can do to a car is let it sit and then drive it to the grocery store and then drive it back home, let it sit, then drive it to the gas station, drive it back home, let it sit. If you own a car that you don't drive all the time, that sits most of the time, the best thing to do is to actually start it up once a week, get it out on the highway, and drive it at speeds in excess of 60 miles an hour. Because again, vehicles are made to be driven. Oil seals, piston rings, all that type of stuff, it's made to get hot, it's made to get cold, they're made to expand and contract and move and all that other stuff, and when they don't, it just gets rotten. So, alrighty folks, so there's an explanation behind this Cadillac. It's not worth spending any more money on it. I'm going to get it back together and get it back to these owners because I know that they've become pretty impatient with me, and I just need to get this vehicle back to them and all that other good stuff. So that's what we're gonna do. All right, everybody, thank you for your support. This is Matthew, your friendly neighborhood technician, my apprentice Braxton, and Tayden, wherever he's at in here. We are signing off for the day, guys.